From a past of pain and humiliation to victory, how I transformed my suffering into power and conquered my freedom. I clearly remember the day my grandfather decided to take me with him. It wasn't just a change of country, it was a change of life. I knew that in some way, it was my chance to start over, but at the same time, I felt lost. The idea of living in another country, without my family, without my acquaintances, was terrifying. Deep down, part of me was relieved to leave a toxic environment, but another part still felt somewhat dependent, as if I was stepping out of my comfort zone into something I didn't even know what it would be. When I arrived there, everything seemed so new. My grandfather welcomed me warmly, but it was clear I had a lot to learn. He helped me with my first steps. I got a simple job in a mechanic's shop, which was what I knew how to do. But the truth is, I was more lost than anything. The beginning was difficult. The first few months were a constant internal battle, a struggle between the fear of the new and the desire to show that I was capable of more. I was alone, without the support of my parents or the presence of my brother. And it was in this void that I began to realize something about myself. I was searching for more than a life change. I was searching to find who I truly was. The days at the workshop were long and often exhausting. I dealt with difficult customers, broken parts, and most of all, the feeling that with each passing day, I was further away from being who I wanted to be. I was no longer the invisible Miguel, but I was still far from fulfilled. Doubts haunted me. Could I truly achieve something great with my life, or would I always be ordinary, trapped by the destiny my family had given me? It was easy to think that my chances were slipping away. I often found myself thinking about giving up because it felt like the weight of all the lies and manipulation I had lived through for so long still consumed me. But then something began to change. I remember a specific moment one night after a particularly difficult day. I was sitting in the small kitchen of my grandfather's house, alone, when something inside me awakened. I was tired of wondering if I could truly be someone different. It seemed like everything I had experienced up until that point was preparation for that moment. I didn't know exactly what to do, but I knew I couldn't go back. The anger and pain I felt for everything my family had done wouldn't be enough to destroy me. I had to do something to change, not just for myself, but to prove that my life was worth living. The next day, I made a decision. I began focusing on something I'd ignored until that moment, my own personal growth. I decided to study mechanics more, learn new techniques, and above all, I began to surround myself with people who inspired me. It was scary because I still had that constant fear of failure, but at the same time, I began to realize I was no longer alone on this journey. My grandfather, with his quiet demeanor, was always there, supporting me subtly but firmly. He believed in me in a way no one else had before, and that was crucial. Little by little, the work in the workshop began to make more sense. I felt more competent, more capable, and this reflected in the way people viewed me. As time passed, things began to flow in ways I hadn't imagined. I gained more confidence in my work, and I was increasingly recognized by my superiors. Until then, I only knew basic mechanics, but I gradually gained mastery, learned from the challenges, and most importantly, believed I had a purpose. Within a year, I was promoted to a position of greater responsibility in the workshop. It was a small step, but for me it was a huge sign that change was happening. It wasn't just about the work itself, but about the way I was transforming. From someone who saw myself as useless, I was gradually becoming someone who was earning respect. Little by little, I distanced myself from the shadows of the past. I began to realize that my story of overcoming wasn't tied to what my family had done or failed to do, but to what I was building on my own. Each achievement, each small success, was a step toward leaving behind the Miguel who hid in the shadows. I learned the hard way that true freedom wasn't found in the absence of my family or in the things they had done, but in control over my own life, in my own choices. One of the things that struck me most during this process was how my self-perception changed. I stopped being a victim of circumstances and began to see life as a series of opportunities for growth. Even in the most difficult situations, I began to understand that deep down, the biggest obstacle was my fear of trying. From the moment I faced that fear, things began to fall into place in ways I never imagined. It wasn't a miraculous transformation, but it was a real, concrete change. I learned to trust myself and believe that I deserved better, regardless of what my family thought or had done. Most significant, however, was when my grandfather, during a simple dinner, looked me in the eye and said, "I knew you could do it, Miguel. You just had to believe in yourself." I'll never forget those words. They were simple, but they meant the world to me. That validation I never had in my family, I finally found in my grandfather. He wasn't perfect, but unlike everyone else, he saw me, listened to me, and believed in me, and that made all the difference. Today, looking back, I realize how much this experience shaped me. I'm no longer the person I was when I left Brazil, feeling invisible and worthless. I learned that overcoming obstacles doesn't come from a single moment, but from a series of small choices, from a continuous effort to be better, to rise again even when all seems lost. Today, I'm grateful for the pain, the hardships, because they're what made me grow. It's not easy, but I know that true transformation comes from within, and everything I've experienced has taught me that, in the end, we ourselves must write our own story. For a long time, I believed the solution to my pain lay in something external. I thought that if my family treated me better, or if I received more recognition, things would be different. I realized, over time, that the key to change lay in how I reacted to what was happening around me. I couldn't control the actions of others, but I could control my own reaction. This didn't mean I would accept what was done to me, but it did mean I could choose not to let it define my path. The beginning of this journey was lonelier than I imagined. The distance from my family and the lack of close friends made me feel isolated in an unfamiliar country. Although my grandfather was always there, he never expressed much. I often felt like I was dealing with my own emotions alone. There were days when I desperately wanted to talk to someone about everything. That had happened, but I didn't know where to begin. The feeling of abandonment was still there, but now I was learning to cope with it differently. One of the first lessons I learned was about resilience. I realized it wouldn't be easy, but that pain could be a learning tool. Working in the shop was physically exhausting, but at the same time it gave me purpose. The feeling of ending the day knowing I'd made something with my own hands gave me a small relief. Every satisfied customer, every successfully repaired car was a reminder that I was, little by little, building something of my own. It gave me a sense of accomplishment I'd never experienced before. Over time, I began to see others around me differently. The people in the workshop, my co-workers, began to respect me more. They saw that I was truly dedicated to what I did, and this made me feel accepted, not for what I had, but for what I was offering. I was no longer just the invisible son. I was someone with a value of my own, something I never imagined I could be. This recognition was small, but it was fundamental to my process of overcoming. I knew that to truly change, I couldn't just stick to my shop work. So I decided to invest more in myself. I started studying automotive mechanics at night, watching videos, reading books, and even taking online courses. It was exhausting, but I was determined. I wanted more than just being a basic mechanic. I wanted to be someone who had complete mastery over what I did. I was creating a new version of myself, a more self-confident version, better prepared to face whatever lay ahead. Little by little, opportunities began to emerge. A network of contacts began to form, and people began seeking me out, not only for my services, but also for the way I approached what I did. One thing I noticed was how my energy and confidence began to positively impact others. When you start believing in yourself, the world begins to reflect that back. I was beginning to realize that the key to success wasn't running away from my past, but learning to use it as fuel for the future. With this new vision, my work at the workshop became a springboard for something bigger. That's when the opportunity arose to open my own workshop. I didn't have much money, but my grandfather helped me with the initial financing. In the beginning, it was a daily struggle. I had no experience as a businessman, and every decision felt like a risk. But over time, I learned, made mistakes, and corrected them. Each mistake made me stronger, more capable of dealing with difficulties. I learned to be patient, to wait for the right moment, to make decisions more wisely. As time passed, I created something that was my own. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I was no longer living in the shadow of who I was or what my family made me be. I was building my own identity, and that was something no gift, no lie or manipulation could take away from me. My greatest victory wasn't financial success, but the fact that I was finally living my truth without caring what others thought. The most shocking thing of all was when, a few years later, I had to return to Brazil for personal reasons. It was a strange moment, because I knew that despite all my achievements, there was still a part of me that needed to face the ghosts of the past. When I saw my parents and my brother, what I realized was that, although the wounds were still there, they no longer had the power to define me. I was more than what they thought of me. I was someone who had risen again, someone who had found my own worth. I wasn't there to seek their approval, nor to revisit past mistakes. I was there to affirm to myself that I had overcome everything that held me back from being who I am. I had the right to be happy, to be successful, to be who I chose to be. It didn't matter what my family thought or didn't think. The only thing that mattered was what I was creating for myself. That visit to Brazil was a milestone for me because I was able to look back and see that the pain I once felt didn't destroy me. It strengthened me. And it was this strengthening that allowed me to create a life different from the one I expected when I left there. Feeling invisible, I was no longer invisible to myself. And as I looked back at all I had achieved, I was overcome with gratitude. Not for my family, nor for my circumstances, but for myself, for the courage to change, for the determination not to let my story be defined by the actions of others. I learned that true overcoming isn't about changing others, but about changing yourself. And in doing so, you begin to change the world around you. Today, I'm living a very different life than I ever imagined possible. I have my own business, I'm respected for what I do, and most importantly, I respect myself. I've learned that true victory is learning to get back up after every fall and to believe in yourself when the whole world seems to doubt you. Overcoming adversity isn't a destination, but a continuous journey. And this journey, however difficult it may have been, has made me understand my true worth. And if I could give one piece of advice to anyone reading this, it would be, never let circumstances or people define who you are. You have the strength within you to change anything. It doesn't matter what you've been through, what matters is what you're willing to do now to become the best version of yourself.